May 1st, 1960. Over the Soviet Union, a spy plane falls from the sky, igniting a global crisis and exposing the vulnerability of the United States. Days later, urgent whispers fill secret bunkers. The Soviets close their skies for good. In the shadows, the United States bets everything on an aircraft no radar can track, a jet so fast it could photograph missile silos while twisting above 80,000 feet, untouched by Soviet missiles or MiG-25 fighters. Blackbird technology seemed to rewrite the rules, and still the Soviets could not believe what their radars showed. How did this happen, and why did one devastating incident change everything? In the hours after the U-2 flown by, France's Gary Powers spiraled into a potato field near Sverdlovsk. The world turned to a single point of failure. Soviet authorities paraded the wreckage, its wings, cameras, and oxygen tanks across newsreels, making clear that the myth of American invulnerability was finished. Powers, alive and in custody, faced a relentless interrogation. Soviet officers demanded technical details, flight paths, and the names of his handlers. His silence and then his forced confessions played out on international broadcasts. Back in Washington, President Eisenhower learned that the Soviets had recovered not only the aircraft, but also Powers himself, and that the KGB had all the evidence it needed. The White House scrambled to contain the fallout, first issuing a weather research cover story, then watching it unravel as Premier Khrushchev revealed the pilot's capture. The Paris summit, scheduled for May 16, 1960, collapsed before it began. Eisenhower's hopes for a thaw in Cold War tensions evaporated overnight. American intelligence leaders faced hard numbers. The U-2, once thought untouchable with a 70,000-foot ceiling, had been breached by a Soviet S-75 Dvina missile. The Soviets fired 14 missiles to bring Powers down, and the message was unmistakable. No spy plane could count on altitude alone. In Moscow, Khrushchev seized the moment, denouncing American aggression and demanding apologies. US officials, blindsided, realized that every overflight risked not just a pilot's life, but global credibility. The incident triggered panic inside the CIA and the Pentagon. The Soviets would now accelerate their surface-to-air missile deployments and tighten their airspace. Intelligence gaps widened. The US could no longer track the rapid construction of missile silos, mobile launchers, or radar installations deep inside Soviet territory. Congressional hearings erupted in Washington, with senators demanding answers. Eisenhower's advisors warned that without new intelligence, the so-called missile gap could spiral into fear-driven spending, or worse, strategic miscalculation. In the aftermath, the need for a radical solution became urgent. The CIA's reliance on vulnerable aircraft had been exposed. Any future platform would have to fly higher, faster, and with a smaller radar signature, something beyond the reach of Soviet missiles and interceptors. Behind closed doors, a classified directive landed on the desk of Clarence Kelly Johnson at Lockheed Skunk Works. The era of slow, high-flying reconnaissance was over. American security now depended on an aircraft no one had ever built. Few believed it possible. A single authorization memo, stamped with the highest level of secrecy, set the new course in motion. The document's language was spare and direct. Lockheed would develop an aircraft that could fly higher and faster than anything in existence, and no detail of its existence would ever reach the public. Clarence Kelly Johnson, already a legend for his work on the U-2, now faced a challenge that demanded total compartmentalization. Even within Lockheed, only a handful of engineers knew the true nature of the project. The program received the codename Oxcart, and its budget lines vanished into classified black accounts, invisible to Congress and the press alike. Secrecy was absolute. He divided Skunk Works into isolated teams, each assigned a sliver of the puzzle. Welders shaping titanium skin never saw the blueprints for the fuel system. Electronics specialists worked in windowless rooms, their access badges granting entry to only a single corridor. Every shipment of titanium, much of it quietly sourced from Soviet-controlled suppliers through a web of front companies, arrived under layers of paperwork designed to mislead. CIA safe houses dotted Southern California, serving as meeting points for couriers and engineers who never used their real names outside the compound. Compartmentalization became routine. The operational heart of the program moved to a remote Nevada outpost known then only as Area 51. Johnson ordered the expansion of Groom Lake runways and the construction of new hangars, all under the cover of night. Contractors signed non-disclosure agreements that threatened prison for the slightest leak. Even Air Force personnel assigned to the base received only partial information. Flight test schedules arrived in sealed envelopes, and maintenance crews rotated out before they could piece together the aircraft's full profile. Area security was relentless. Resource requests bypassed normal procurement channels. Specialized machine tools for working titanium arrived in unmarked crates. Fuel tankers carried experimental fuel to hidden storage tanks, while security teams monitored every delivery. The program's finances were buried in the Defense Department's most opaque ledgers, shielded by layers of need to no clearance. Johnson himself coordinated every major decision, holding weekly meetings in a secure conference room where notes were destroyed at the end of each session. Logistics were as secret as design. Within months, the machinery of secrecy was running at full speed. Skunk Works engineers began sketching designs for an aircraft that would bend the limits of physics. The tools of covert logistics, black budgets, safe houses, and false identities became as essential as slide rules and drafting tables. All of it pointed toward a singular goal: building a reconnaissance platform that could slip past Soviet defenses unseen and untouchable. The Oxcart program moved from paper to metal, and the future of aerial reconnaissance changed forever. Heat shaped every decision inside the Skunk Works. At Mach 3.2, the SR-71 skin would reach 800 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to fry an egg on its nose cone. Ordinary aluminum would have melted or warped before the plane even reached cruise. Engineers turned to titanium, a metal as strong as steel, but much lighter, able to withstand relentless heat without losing its shape. Titanium brought its own challenges. It was notoriously difficult to machine and weld, especially in the quantities needed for the Blackbird's long, slender fuselage and wide wings. Much of the world's supply came from the Soviet Union, so Lockheed's procurement teams built a maze of front companies to quietly buy the metal from their Cold War rivals. Titanium's unique property, expansion under heat, became a design principle. On the ground, the SR-71 looked almost unfinished, with visible seams and gaps running along its body. These were not flaws, they were lifelines. As the plane accelerated, its skin would stretch by several inches, closing those gaps and sealing the fuel tanks tight. Before takeoff, ground crews watched JP-7 fuel drip steadily onto the tarmac, knowing the leaks would stop only when the aircraft was screaming through the upper atmosphere. This cycle of expansion and contraction demanded a new approach to maintenance, with every flight testing the limits of metal fatigue and seal integrity. Standard jet fuel could not survive inside the Blackbird. The J-58 engines generated temperatures that would ignite ordinary fuel before it reached the combustion chamber. Chemists at Shell developed JP-7, a fuel with an exceptionally high ignition point, so stable it would barely burn if lit with a match. To start the engines, crews used a shot of triethylborane, a chemical that burst into green flame on contact with air, providing the spark JP-7 needed to ignite. JP-7 also acted as a coolant, circulating through heat exchangers to absorb excess energy from avionics and hydraulic systems before finally reaching the engines. Each drop carried boron additives, boosting energy content and helping the Blackbird fly farther, faster and higher than anything that came before it. Every detail, expanding titanium, self-sealing tanks, exotic fuel chemistry, was a direct answer to the problem of extreme heat. The result was an aircraft that not only survived in its environment, but thrived, turning the atmosphere's friction into a shield no missile could penetrate. Metallurgists and chemists became as essential to reconnaissance as pilots and navigators, forging a machine that bent the rules of physics to keep its secrets safe. Thrust at the edge of possibility began with the Pratt & Whitney J58 engine, an invention that rewrote the rules of jet propulsion. Unlike any power plant before it, the J58 did not just push the Blackbird through the air. It transformed itself mid-flight, adapting to conditions that would destroy ordinary engines. At takeoff and the subsonic climb, the J58 worked as a conventional turbojet, drawing air through compressor blades and igniting it with the help of afterburners. But as speed increased and the SR-71 sliced through Mach 2, everything changed. Air hitting the inlets at over 1,400 miles per hour carried so much energy it threatened to rip the engine apart. To tame this, engineers designed a movable spike at the mouth of each engine nacelle. As the aircraft accelerated, the spike retracted up to 26 inches, precisely scheduled by an onboard computer. This subtle movement created a standing shockwave inside the inlet, slowing the supersonic air to subsonic speeds before it reached the compressor. Without this, the engine would surge and stall. With it, the Blackbird could keep climbing. As the plane passed Mach 2, the J58 began to shift from turbojet to something closer to a ramjet. Special bypass ducts opened, channeling more than half the incoming air around the core of the engine directly to the afterburner. The compressor, now spinning slower, handled only a fraction of the airflow. The rest was pressurized by sheer speed and ignited downstream, producing enormous thrust as the aircraft screamed past Mach 3.2. This hybrid cycle let the SR-71 cruise at over 2,000 miles per hour for hours at a time. No other operational jet engine has matched this feat. Managing this transition demanded constant attention. Pilots and ground crews watched inlet spike position, exhaust gas temperatures, and bypass door status on every flight. A mistimed spike or a stuck bypass duct could cause an unstart, a violent loss of thrust that slammed the crew forward and sent flames shooting from the intake. Yet when everything worked, the Blackbird's engines thrived on heat and pressure that would melt most aircraft. The J58 did not just survive the inferno, it used it. The engine turned the sky itself into fuel for the world's fastest reconnaissance missions. From the start, the Blackbird's reconnaissance value depended not just on speed and altitude, but on what it could actually see. Engineers at Hycon and Lockheed faced a challenge no camera team had solved before: how to capture sharp, actionable images while the aircraft covered more than 100,000 square miles per hour, often banking at Mach 3.2. At those speeds, even the smallest vibration or misalignment could blur a photograph beyond use. Inside the SR-71's nose and chine bays, the heart of the system was a set of gyro-stabilized optical cameras. These platforms floated on precision bearings, constantly adjusting for pitch, roll, and yaw. The main panoramic optical bar camera swept a continuous strip of film, over 2 miles long and 5 inches wide, across the ground below, delivering horizon-to-horizon coverage in a single pass. The technical objective camera, mounted on a gimbaled platform, could pivot up to 45 degrees left or right, targeting specific sites even as the aircraft turned. Each camera was linked to the astro-inertial navigation system, which tracked stars through a quartz window and fed real-time corrections to keep the lens precisely on target, regardless of turbulence or supersonic maneuvering. Compared to the Corona satellites in orbit, the difference was immediate and obvious. Early satellite images were grainy, sometimes obscured by clouds, and arrived days or weeks after the fact. The SR-71's film, by contrast, could be developed within hours of landing, and its resolution was unmatched, capable of distinguishing vehicles, construction cranes, and even the scaffolding around new missile silos. The side-by-side analysis stunned intelligence officers. Where Corona might show a blurry rectangle, the Blackbird's negatives revealed the exact stage of silo construction, the type of transporter trucks on site, and the presence of mobile radar arrays. This level of detail turned vague suspicions into confirmed intelligence, allowing analysts to track Soviet missile deployments almost in real time. Film magazine capacity was another leap forward. Each mission could carry enough film to capture thousands of high-resolution frames, covering vast swaths of territory in a single sortie. The revisit rate, how often a target could be imaged, was dictated only by fuel, not orbital mechanics. If a new site appeared near Plesetsk or Baikonur, the Blackbird could be tasked to fly over and photograph it within hours. For policymakers and military planners, this meant the difference between guessing and knowing. The Hicon camera suite, stabilized by gyros and guided by starlight, delivered not just pictures, but certainty, an edge no satellite or rival aircraft could match during the Cold War's most dangerous years. Baikonur Cosmodrome stretches across the Kazakh steppe, its launch pads and assembly halls visible even from the edge of space. In the spring of 1973, scaffolding surrounded Pad 110, where the N1L3 lunar booster had just been dismantled. The concrete aprons glinted with fresh oil stains, and rail cars lined up to deliver propellant. Within days, American analysts reviewed photographs that captured the precise stage of demolition. The date stamped on the film matched construction logs, April 18, 1973. Each image revealed not just hardware, but intent, where the Soviets abandoned one program and another took its place. Northwest of Baikonur, the Plesetsk Cosmodrome operated in secrecy. Its missile silos and mobile launcher pads dotted the pine forests, shielded by camouflage nets and false buildings. Yet on May 2, 1974, a new silo roof appeared in a clearing near Site 41. The poured concrete was still curing, and the access road had tire tracks from heavy transporters. Later that summer, another pass showed the silo capped and a new radar array assembled nearby. The construction sequence, once hidden by forest and fog, now played out frame by frame. Sary-Shagan, on the shores of Lake Balkhash, served as the Soviet Union's primary anti-ballistic missile test range. Here, the Americans tracked the evolution of the S-200 and S-300 missile systems. In July 1976, a series of photographs mapped the arrival of mobile launchers and the assembly of a new phased array radar. The images showed fuel trucks parked in geometric formation, scaffolding around the radar dome, and crews installing waveguides. Even the paint on the missile canisters appeared fresh. The timestamps on the negatives matched Soviet test notifications, July 14th and 22nd, 1976, confirming the pace of deployment. Satellite overlays, once grainy and imprecise, now aligned with high-resolution film from the SR-71 Blackbird. Analysts compared the two and found that the Blackbird's imagery could pinpoint the presence of mobile launchers, count fuel trucks, and track the stages of silo construction in real time. The haul was quantifiable. In a single sortie, the aircraft could document dozens of sites, each with a date-stamped record of activity. Every detail, newly poured concrete, scaffolding, the arrangement of vehicles, became a data point for American planners. Each pass over these sites raised alarms in Moscow. The KGB began to suspect that not only were their most sensitive installations being watched, but that the Americans could track progress down to the day. The scale of exposure was no longer theoretical. The evidence, captured in silver halide grains and measured in construction timestamps, made the stakes of the intelligence war unmistakable. Inside the labyrinth of Soviet bureaucracy, the alarm was impossible to ignore. Within weeks of the first confirmed Blackbird overflights, KGB analysts filed internal memoranda stamped with urgency. Reports filtered up from regional commands to the center. American reconnaissance aircraft had captured images that revealed not only the locations but the construction phases of strategic missile silos. One classified summary, dated August 1974, warned that the latest US photographs showed scaffolding and fresh concrete at R-36 launch complexes, details visible even as the intruder banked at supersonic speed. The language grew sharper with each report. A KGB technical assessment from October 1975 described the exposure as unacceptable. It cited evidence that fuel convoys, mobile launchers and radar arrays at Plesetsk and Baikonur had been recorded in such detail that camouflage efforts were rendered ineffective. The memo questioned whether standard concealment protocols could ever keep pace with an aircraft that completed its pass before missile crews could even react. In Moscow, these findings triggered a chain reaction. The Ministry of Defense ordered a full review of air defense readiness. A PVO Air Defense Forces circular, circulated in January 1976, referenced multiple instances of American aerial photography of active construction sites and called for immediate countermeasures. The directive demanded that all missile field commanders report on the status of camouflage, decoy deployment, and rapid construction techniques. Yet the underlying frustration was clear. At Mach 3, the Blackbird could photograph a site from multiple angles in a single sortie, outpacing both interceptors and surface-to-air missiles. By 1977, internal KGB complaints focused on the R-36 Satan silos. One report, circulated to the General Staff, admitted that the Americans now possessed a photographic record of every silo's construction timeline. The memo's language was blunt. The probability of undetected deployment is negligible. It referenced specific dates, September 12th and October the 3rd, when new silo roofs and transporter vehicles appeared in US imagery just hours after assembly. A sense of bureaucratic panic set in. KGB analysts questioned whether the very concept of strategic surprise was still possible. Handwritten notes in the margins of a late 1978 internal review asked whether any camouflage doctrine could survive a reconnaissance platform that was, in effect, uncatchable. By the end of the decade, the files grew thick with requests for new counterintelligence measures, but the tone was increasingly resigned. The evidence was irrefutable. The Blackbird's cameras had pierced every layer of Soviet secrecy, and no one could say how much more the Americans now knew. A MiG-25 Foxbat pilot straps in as the scramble order blares through the command post. The ground crew works fast, swinging ladders clear and pulling intake covers. The Foxbat's twin Tumansky R-15 engines roar to life, their afterburners sending shockwaves across the tarmac. Climbing fast, the MiG-25 leaves behind the haze of the airfield and pushes for altitude, its nose pointed towards the upper edge of the troposphere. Inside the cockpit, the pilot watches the altimeter spin upward 55,000 feet, then 60,000 feet, then 65,000 feet. The aircraft shudders as it nears its ceiling. The Foxbat's airspeed indicator creeps toward Mach 2.8. Below, the radar controller's voice crackles in the headset, calling out bearings and range. The SR-71, barely a blip on the scope, is already coasting above 80,000 feet. The The Foxbat is climbing at full thrust, but the margin is shrinking. At 68,000 feet, the red warning lights flicker to life on the engine control panel. Turbine inlet temperatures creep toward their limits. The R-15 engines are designed for brief sprints, not sustained chases at the edge of the atmosphere. Every second at maximum power risks burning through turbine blades. The pilot glances down at the temperature gauge. The needle hovers at the red line, 870 degrees Celsius. Any higher and the engine will seize. The stick feels sluggish, the air is thin, controls heavy. The Foxbat cannot climb any further. For a moment, the SR-71 appears as a faint glint, a black dart streaking across the sky, impossibly high and fast. Attempts to close the gap come down to seconds. The Foxbat levels off, engines straining, but the SR-71 is already far ahead, accelerating away. The MiG's climb rate plummets. Any further push risks a flameout or catastrophic failure. The pilot weighs the odds. One more burst of afterburner could mean a forced landing or worse. The Foxbat's limits are not just technical, but physical. Above 68,000 feet, the engines become liabilities. Any attempt to follow the American plane ends at the edge of the performance envelope, with temperature gauges pegged, warning lights blinking, and the target vanishing into the stratosphere. Back on the ground, maintenance crews often find scorched turbine blades and cracked casings after these intercept attempts. The cost of each scramble is measured in hours of repairs, and the quiet frustration of pilots who know the ceiling is absolute. The SR-71, flying 10 miles higher, remains untouchable. Its only real adversary, the laws of physics, not the fighter jets below. Radar operators huddled over their consoles as the S-200 missile batteries powered up across the Soviet heartland. The system's guidance required a continuous radar lock, no small feat at the edge of space. Operators watched green sweeps crawl across cathode ray screens, each revolution taking several seconds to complete. In that brief interval, the SR-71 covered more than 5 miles, slipping from one grid square to the next before the radar beam could catch up. The S-200's semi-active guidance demanded that ground-based radar illuminate the target for the missile to home in. But the Blackbird's velocity turned every engagement into a race against time. The missile's flight computer needed a stable track. Any break in the radar lock meant the missile would veer off course, chasing a ghost. Operators called out azimuth and range, recalculating firing solutions as the blip darted across the screen. By the time the order to launch was given, the aircraft had already shifted position, sometimes by more than a dozen miles. One crew chief at a site outside Plesetsk recalled the frustration. The radar would acquire a faint return, the system would lock, and the launch sequence would begin. But as the missile rose, the target's predicted path was already obsolete. The Blackbird's speed, over 3,000 feet per second, left guidance computers with only the briefest window to calculate intercept. In the control bunker, officers stared at tracking plots that never quite lined up, the predicted intercept point always lagging behind the aircraft's actual course. The radar's scan rate, measured in seconds, could not match the pace of a target that crossed the engagement envelope in less than a minute. Operators tried to compensate by anticipating the SR-71 trajectory, but even the most experienced crews found themselves outmaneuvered by physics. The missile's own speed, impressive against conventional bombers, was just enough to keep it in the chase, never enough to close the gap. Each failed lock brought a new round of recalibrations, but the underlying problem remained. Guidance systems built for subsonic targets could not keep up with a reconnaissance plane that treated the upper atmosphere like an expressway. Inside the bunkers, frustration mounted. The radar operators' reports grew sharper, their language edged with resignation. The S-200's technical specifications looked unbeatable on paper, range, altitude, speed, but in practice, the numbers never added up. Every attempted engagement ended with the same result. The the Blackbird vanished from the screen, leaving only a fading echo and a string of missed opportunities. The ground crews cycled through drills and maintenance, but morale slipped with each unsuccessful intercept. The gap between Soviet missile technology and American speed was no longer theoretical. It played out second by second on every radar screen from the Baltic to Baikonur. Brian Schul called the Baltic Corridor a place where every warning mattered. In 1982, flying at Mach 3.1 over the Gulf of Finland, he and Walt Watson watched the radar warning receiver pulse. A Soviet tracking radar had locked on. Watson reached for the jamming panel and activated the ALQ-135. The cockpit filled with the low hum of countermeasures. Below, missile crews tracked a target that was already slipping away. Schul nudged the throttles forward, the Blackbird pressing them back as it surged past 2,100 miles per hour. The lock tone faded. Later, the film revealed missile pads and fuel convoys near Leningrad, proof the cameras had captured what satellites could not, even as the crew balanced on the edge of danger. Richard Graham flew the Murmansk route, where Arctic winds battered the airframe and Soviet interceptors waited along the border. On one sortie, his RSO called out a second lock, this time from a mobile S-200 site near Severomorsk. Graham stayed steady, trusting the Blackbird's speed to outpace any missile. The jamming system stood ready, but the real defense was kinetic, outrun not outgun. The camera's gyro-stabilized platform held as the aircraft banked, capturing images that later revealed new submarine pens under construction. Mission logs recorded Mach 3.2 at 81,000 feet, 1,200 nautical miles in under 40 minutes. The Soviet response, as always, came too late. By the time interceptors scrambled, the Blackbird was gone, its film canisters holding secrets that satellites could only guess at. Ed Yielding's corridor ran along the Pacific, skirting Kamchatka and Vladivostok. On a spring mission, his RSO detected both search and track radars lighting up the threat receiver. Yielding climbed to 85,000 feet, engines burning bright. The navigation system kept the cameras aligned as the Blackbird arced through a supersonic turn. The HiCon system recorded every detail: mobile launchers, radar trucks, even fresh tire marks on silo roads. In the debrief, Yielding described the calm that settled in the cockpit once the threat passed, the sense that at those speeds, human reaction and machine precision had fused. The mission film, developed hours later, showed sharp, actionable intelligence gathered in the time it took most aircraft to cross a single country. For these crews, every sortie tested the limits of man and machine. The Blackbird's edge was real, but it was the judgment and nerve of its pilots and RSOS that turned it into certainty. Their voices, captured in mission logs and cockpit tapes, speak of calm confidence, of trust in training, aircraft, and each other, even as the world's most powerful air defenses tried and failed to bring them down. In a world where real-time satellite imagery and AI surveillance are rewriting the rules, the shock once caused by a Mach 3 camera plane feels almost quaint. Yet, the SR-71 Blackbird proved that technological surprise can reshape global power overnight. Today, as hypersonic systems and autonomous eyes emerge, the true contest is still invisibility versus awareness. The question now is not who can fly fastest, but who sees first. What frontier do you think comes next?